Hi everybody, welcome to today's NBS webinar, Digital Construction Report 2023. Today's webinar will take around 50 minutes. Everyone's microphone is muted and you can ask questions using the question box on the screen. My name is Stephen Hamil, Innovation Director at NBS. Before I introduce our main speaker, just want to reflect that the Digital Construction Report from NBS is now in its 12th year. It started off as the Building Information Modelling Report back in March 2011, when sort of nearly half the industry wasn't even aware of what the term BIM meant. So going back to that report from 2011, there's the word cloud, what those that were aware of BIM, what it meant, and then again what their sort of views were on adopting it, largely around increasing the coordination of the construction documentation and accepting it will mean change the workflow. So without further ado, sort of 12 years on, we sort of widened the scope of the report, looking at all things digital for construction industry. But over to my colleague David Bain, Research Manager at NBS. David.
Thanks, Stephen, and morning, everybody. So I'm going to take you through our latest digital construction report, which we've just published recently this year. So I'll just go through a bit of background first of all. So people may be aware of the fact that we've been doing research in this kind of area for some time now. Probably people may be most aware of the BIM report that we started back in 2011, and we've been tracking BIM and related issues in the industry since then, really, and evolved this research and this report into the Digital Construction Report in 2021 to kind of cover broader themes and kind of reflect what's happening in the industry in terms of other innovations and other technologies that are being used. So for this survey, we sent it to built environment professionals in the UK, but beyond that as well. And the survey was live from July to September this year. We had 723 responses, and we donated £1 for every response to the charity Crash, which supports vulnerable people and homeless people by creating good places for them to live and using construction support and expertise to do that. So I'll tell you a little bit about the people that took part in a second, but I want to thank the organisations that support the survey. So we always get really generous support from different organisations in the industry, different institutes and bodies representing different aspects of the profession. And this really helps us to get a good representative sample of different perspectives and different disciplines across the industry. And so these are the organisations that supported us this year. And we wanted to thank Glenigan in particular for promoting the survey as well and contributing to the report. So who took part in the survey? So at a kind of high level, we had about 2/3 that are in a kind of consultant, designer, specifier role. And this is our biggest group, and this does tend to be our biggest group in the surveys that we do. But we also, as you can see, get a good response from other parts of the industry as well, so other parts of the project team, with 13% working in kind of contractor, constructor kind of roles. Quite a lot of those are in sort of main contractor organisations, but there are also a lot in sort of subcontractors and other organisations of different sizes as well. We've got just over 10% working for suppliers and manufacturers in those kind of roles, sort of supplying into the projects, and then just under 10% in client roles for organisations like local authorities and schools, universities, government, developers, those kind of organisations. And then we also have a few that are in a kind of range of different roles, say project manager type roles and things like that. So our kind of biggest single discipline is the architect discipline. 23% of our architects kind of just reflects our sort of core customer base sort of historically. But you can see there's lots of other professions that have taken part. BIM managers and specialists, perhaps not surprisingly. also technologists, project managers, engineers, surveyors, and then kind of on the supplier and manufacturer side, we have marketing specialists and product specialists as well. So we've got a real range of different perspectives and professions and disciplines that took part. In terms of the actual organizations themselves, then the best represented organization is architectural practices, of just under a third of the sample with those. But you can see we've got manufacturers, sort of 10%, which is kind of about 70, 80 people within the sample. And then we've got multidisciplinary practices, services engineers, contractors, as mentioned as well. So kind of, again, a range of organization types, and also a range of sizes too. So we have got a lot of organizations that are quite large taking part, but you can also see that we've got representation right across the board, from micro businesses with only kind of 1 or 2 people working with them. So that allows us to kind of look at responses from all these different types of organization and background, and then compare differences between them and see where things might be a bit different for say small organizations compared to large ones, or consultants compared to contractors, and that kind of thing. And then just to talk a little bit about the location people are based in. So obviously we're UK based, and 72% of people taking part in the survey are based in the UK, but we always get a lot of interest internationally for the survey, and you can see that there's people who've taken part in the survey from all around the world. There's 60 countries represented across 6 continents, particularly Europe, and parts of Asia as well. So we've got, quite a few different perspectives from different locations, as well as from the UK itself. And then we always like to just make sure that we're getting a range of perspectives in terms of kind of career experience and age as well, just to make sure that we're covering people who are new in their careers and those who have been working in the industry for a long time. So we've got, again, that kind of range of views. And we do find sometimes there are differences based on sort of age and experience as well. So we like to sort of track that too. So that's the background to the survey in terms of how we did it and who took part. First of all, just wanted to start off talking a bit about BIM, as we normally tend to do. So, the feedback that we quite often receive in our research and other areas, and also some of the things we kind of see in discussions in the media as well, and that kind of thing, do kind of show that there are still kind of quite varying perceptions of BIM, and it does mean different things to different people. And there's this debate about the terminology. Some people think there's too much jargon. There are different standards to follow. Whilst there's a newer standard, there was obviously an older standard before that. So we thought it would be good to ask people what they actually think BIM means. What does it mean to them? And those views do vary as we might have expected. So you can see here that there's quite a spread of views. Some people do relate it very much to the standards, and more so with the current international standard of 19650, that sort of suite of standards, which I think is encouraging, is that's the kind of the current one to follow, as opposed to the previous sort of BS and PAS 1192 sort of old level 2 BIM, if you like, standard. So there are people that view it like that, especially people who have adopted BIM and perhaps some of the kind of larger organizations that are working on bigger projects. But there are people who see it a bit differently. So the largest response here is actually people who see it as better information management. I guess that kind of simple idea that managing information in a good way is what kind of they see as BIM, and is a positive thing for projects. And that does reflect some of the things that have been happening in the industry of late in terms of the way people are talking about BIM. We also see quite a lot of people seeing it as the foundation of digital transformation. So something which is kind of a real enabler of change, if you like. And again, these are probably more likely to be people who perhaps might not probably have kind of adopted BIM and embraced some of the new technologies. But certainly there are a lot of people there who see the kind of way to enable other things, like working with digital twins and AI and things like that, having that kind of standardized, kind of organized, structured information that can then be machine readable and used in other ways. So then in terms of the actual adoption of BIM, I mean, you can see here with this chart that, you know, the big thing really is that it hasn't changed that much over the last 2 years. It's remained quite steady after quite a growth up to and around the point that the UK BIM mandate was kind of released. And since then, since hitting that kind of 70-71% adoption figure, it's remained really consistent. So I guess the positive side of that is that, you know, it's become embedded and used by a lot of people in the industry, and I think for a lot of organizations, especially sort of larger organizations, it's become the norm and the way that people are working, and they're kind of seeing the benefits of that. And we do see that it's higher among certain types of organizations. So among kind of architectural organizations, it's higher than that 70%. It's around 77%, especially for organizations in the UK as well. So if we look at UK engineering organizations, it's over 80%. Same with multidisciplinary as well. So some of those organizations are more likely to be using it. We also find some differences with age as well, that so those kind of under the sort of 55-ish sort of age range are more likely to say that they've adopted it too, which would suggest that, you know, as we move into the future and more young people come into the industry, that it's likely to increase. And certainly as well, in terms of the intention to adopt BIM, you know, the majority of people still say they intend to do it. There's relatively small numbers who say that they don't, but there are, you know, clearly challenges around adopting BIM, which people do talk about and tell us about in the survey. So I wanted to share some of the comments relating to that here. So we've got a few different themes which do come out, you know, some of these do reflect themes that aren't new really, that they have often been mentioned before. So these are still areas I think perhaps as an industry we need to kind of try to sort of address and support, where people are keen to, you know, adopt the sort of better information management and kind of BIM ways of working. But one of the themes that comes through is that, you know, the benefits of BIM shouldn't just be for buildings, shouldn't just be for large new build projects. And there are people working in infrastructure and landscape and those areas that want to kind of see the benefits applied to their parts of the industry. But you can see there's a comment here suggesting that there's not enough kind of BIM data, if you like, for natural objects and materials and those kinds of things. Excuse me. There's also, you know, that we've heard it quite a lot before, that smaller organizations, it can be quite challenging for them to kind of adopt new ways of working in technology and invest in new software and new ways to and new learning as well. So sometimes there can be challenges for them, and also kind of a question about how appropriate certain aspects of it are to the smallest kind of small refurb building extensions for a house kind of projects. And then there's also a theme that comes through about kind of maybe a kind of shift in understanding that with BIM and better information management and more kind of thought and detail about the design up front, there's perhaps more time that's required earlier on in the process, and perhaps that needs to be reflected in clients' understanding and fee structures and those kinds of things, with the idea that being that maybe costs might be slightly higher up front, but then there'll be savings later when projects get onto site, because the information will be better and everybody will be clear about exactly what's happening on site, with hopefully fewer errors and things like that, and less rework. So kind of moving on into a couple of the more sort of detailed areas of BIM. So we ask about some of the tasks that people might get involved with, which are kind of reflect working in terms of the ISO 19650 suite of standards. Excuse me. And we find that quite a lot of people are, involved with or doing some of these things. So in particular, over 2/3 involved with model design reviews, over half BIM execution plans, nearly 2/3 with common data environments, sharing information that way in the cloud, and just under half involved with detailed responsibility matrices of making it clear exactly who's responsible for what on a project. So, in some ways that's a positive thing, but what we haven't really seen since the last survey is much of a growth in these things. These figures are quite similar to the previous survey and the one before that. There's one or two things we might pick up on here. So, for instance, it was 50% of architects said that they were involved with detailed responsibility matrix. So whilst that's good that many are saying that, that means it does imply that quite a lot aren't involved in either developing them or working with them if somebody else in the project team has developed them and shared them. And given the responsibilities of the principal designer role that's coming in as part of the Building Safety Act, it would seem it's really important that these are present for projects, that people are really clear about exactly who is doing what, who's responsible for what on a project. So that's something we would kind of hope and expect to increase in coming years. Okay. The other area in terms of kind of tasks that are involved in a project that sort of relate to the standards are to do with sharing information. And this is slightly different in that we see here that there's been a growth in all of these points since the last survey. So following a naming convention for all information that's shared has increased, and that's now above 3/4. Exchanging information in IFC, Industry Foundation Classes format, is increasing as well, over half. Exchanging information in COBie format as well, construction operations building information exchange, that's also increased as well, over 1/3. And also classifying information using Uniclass, nearly half said that they did this as well. So on those points, it looks like there are kind of improvements and people carrying out tasks and working on projects in a way that reflects the standard, and it's seen by quite a lot of people as sort of good practice in sharing information. There are some things that are mentioned by people, quite often people who are embracing BIM and have bought into the whole idea of it, who just sort of mentioning things that sort of need to happen going forward. So one thing is that we need to see information getting delivered to people on site who are building projects. They need the right information at the right time to kind of support the work that actually goes on the site, not just exchanging information during the design phase between members of the design team. So that's one of the things that comes out. And also talking about things like information getting through to support maintenance and retrofit and kind of the whole life of the project, essentially. So again, trying to move away from working in silos, so that the team is working together and communicating effectively. We ask about classification, and we've been sort of looking at this for a little while, and the thing here to mention is that the use of Uniclass does seem to continue to be increasing. So we asked people what the most commonly used classification was, and nearly half of the people in the survey said it was Uniclass, 46%, higher than other forms of classification, whether that's people using their own system in-house, whether it's the common arrangement of work sections classification, which has been around for some years, especially in the UK, or whether it's other sort of standards used elsewhere like Omniclass. We do see some differences in the use of cores among UK architects. Is still slightly higher than Uniclass, but it's very, very close, and it may well be that we see that change in future surveys. We ask a little bit about digital objects, and we asked the manufacturers and suppliers that took part in the survey about how they manage their information and how they provide their information to the people that need it. And clearly this is a really important aspect of working in project teams at the moment and supporting good practice in construction. So one of the areas that we've heard a lot about from designers and people that need product information is the usefulness and importance of having good BIM and digital objects to help them with their design. It can be easily slotted into the design in whatever design package is being used, and then share that in terms of the specification as well. And having good BIM objects can really kind of help save a lot of time for designers when they're going through that part of the process. So it's important that suppliers and manufacturers are providing the data in that way. And we do see here that a lot of suppliers are doing that. So 17% say they do it for all of their products. And that can be a lot of products for some manufacturers, but we're also seeing that 40% are doing it for the majority of their products. So if you put those two together, we can see that well over half are providing BIM objects for the majority or all of their products. And then in terms of the management side of it, it's managing product data is obviously can be a real challenge when you've got a lot of products to manage. There are new standards which can affect products being developed all the time and changed. So managing that information and keeping it up to date, pushing it out to the different places where it needs to be surfaced, whether that's websites, online product directories, product data sheets, all those sort of different places where the information could be made available. Having a PIM system, product information management system, can really help suppliers in that area to manage it well and keep it up to date for the users, so they know they can trust the information. So something we've been asking about is whether manufacturers are using these kind of systems to help them do that. And we can see here that 28% said they do use that kind of system, and the same percentage are actually looking at setting one up as well. So a lot of manufacturers and suppliers are looking at introducing PIMs to kind of help them manage their data as well as they can, which we'd see as an encouraging thing going forward. So that's the kind of BIM part of the research. We just kind of move on to a more general part about technology adoption and the different kinds of technologies that people are starting to use at the moment. So we start off with cloud computing. We've been asking about people's use of this for a while now, and we have seen the use of it, gradually increase over the last few years, which probably none of us are surprised about. It's become almost kind of part of everyday life for a lot of people in their professional and personal lives, using kind of different cloud computing software and technologies. So 80% say that they use it now. It's quite possibly higher than that. And I think one of the things about this area is that the definition of cloud computing, potentially it can include, almost any kind of cloud storage, email systems, anything which is kind of stored or used online using software or servers which are delivered online. So you could argue that pretty much all of us are doing that in some way. But certainly based on people's perception of what they're doing and their awareness of what they're using, it's 80%, and that's higher than it's been in previous surveys. And that is higher for some organizations as well, more than others too. And then you can see that most people do anticipate adopting it. There are a few who feel that they won't do, but I think it's something which is going to be almost universal really soon. You can see there's quite a lot of common uses of it. So storage is an obvious one. People storing documents in things like OneDrive and Google Drive and common data environments and those kinds of things. And then that does overlap with the other areas that it's used. So obviously you can then share documents with clients or share it with project team members, collaborate on those documents as well. So you can see that a lot of people in the industry are doing those things. And then a few people are using it for kind of the area sort of digital signatures and contracts as well, and that sort of thing. So the next one we looked at was sort of the area of immersive tech. So virtual reality, mixed reality, augmented reality, all those different kind of slightly different areas of technology. We've seen here for a while that a minority have been experimenting with it and using it. But what's kind of different with this area is that it's not increased massively over the last few years. This kind of core of roughly about a third of the industry seem to be using these different technologies, but it hasn't increased, that much over time. So there is an intent to use them. As you can see, quite a lot of people beyond that sort of 36% do intend using some of these forms of technology for things, but we aren't seeing that kind of coming through in reality from one year to the next at the moment. The ways that people tend to be using it are things like, sharing designs and doing walkthroughs in a virtual environment with clients, so they can kind of really properly experience what a building or a facility might look like once it's built. And then also things like, visualizing how it will interface with existing surroundings and also clash detection, those kind of things. We also see manufacturers and suppliers using it to market their products as well and kind of bring them to life. So we've seen a lot of talk and coverage about offsite construction recently. The government's encouraged this area. We've seen developments in modular construction where whole parts of buildings or even whole buildings are constructed offsite and then brought to site. We have seen some setbacks in that area with some modular factories closing, but the data from the survey do suggest that the use of offsite is still increasing. Well over half say that they've been involved with projects in the last year that have an offsite element to them. The biggest area is sort of the kind of smaller components, if you like, sort of assemblies and accessories. But we do see 34% of people saying they've been involved with projects that have a volumetric modular construction aspect to them. So there are signs that it is an area that's increasing, and there are some comments about that in the survey as well. But as well as our data from the survey, then there's other data which also supports the fact that offsite construction and the wider area of modern methods of construction is an area that is increasing. So working with our sister company Glenigan, this is data from their own database based on the planning system, which shows the number of project starts for projects in the UK. And from that, you can see that chart on the left, which shows the general upward trend of projects which use a kind of modern method of construction element in them, in terms of projects that have started. And this takes you from 2017 up to this year. And then within that kind of area of modern methods of construction, the sort of subset of offsite construction, then 7% of new build projects that started during the first 9 months of this year had an offsite element to them. And in terms of value, that increases to 11%, as often the offsite projects tend to be larger projects. So that definitely shows that the actual kind of data based on projects that are starting have a higher proportion of offsite projects. The sectors where that's happening the most are hotel and leisure, industrial, education projects. And together they account for over half of the kind of offsite projects that are happening within the industry. So they're the kind of some of the sort of growth areas in terms of where that type of sort of design and construction approach is happening. So it definitely does appear to be a growth area still, despite some of the kind of setbacks that have happened of late. We move on to digital twins. So this has been an area that's been quite a sort of perhaps kind of area for early adopters, if you like, people kind of just exploring the technology in previous years. We are seeing sort of signs of that growing a little bit now. So 25% of people taking part in the survey said that they've been involved in a project that use a digital twin. There are issues around what people's understanding of a digital twin is, and there are kind of definitions out there, but people may still have different views on what that is, a bit like BIM. So we do need to sort of take that into account when people are taking part in the survey, and kind of saying what they've been doing on their project. There can be some variability here, but the idea of using some kind of digital model which reflects and links to an actual real building and the performance of that building is something which people are saying that they've been involved with. A quarter of people are saying that they've been involved with that. It's actually quite often clients have mentioned that, which makes sense on the basis that they would want that data for the building that they are looking after and managing and running. One of the things that's been mentioned in relation to things like digital twin and some of the new technology areas are, again, the kind of importance of the quality of information. So using these technologies, which can have great potential, but making sure that the actual information that goes into them is good quality as well. So, a kind of a word of caution in a way, but an understanding that it can be used to positive effect. And then the final thing we ask about, and perhaps not surprisingly this year, given all of the talk about AI, but we asked about AI this time round, and we haven't done that for the last couple of years, because when we previously asked about it, the numbers of people talking about using AI and planning to were very low, and it's really only this year where we've seen a real kind of difference in that area. So we asked whether people were using AI on projects. We didn't find a sudden explosion of everybody saying we're now using AI. But what we have found is that over a fifth, 22%, say they are using it now, 20% say they'll be using it in a year. So, that's quite a lot higher than we saw in previous surveys, where the kind of numbers were in sort of single figures, really, for those saying they were using it. So it does indicate that it's a growth area in terms of technology. We saw a few comments around this of people talking about the different ways they're using AI technologies. So unsurprisingly, people talking about using ChatGPT, helping to develop reports, doing research, kind of helping to automate repetitive tasks, so generative design, and helping with concept design, to look at different design concepts. So people finding different ways of using it. Some quite excited comments about it. Also, though, some sense that there needs to be some caution. There's potential pitfalls around AI in terms of knowing where information is sourced and being confident and being able to trust the information, data protection and privacy issues. So there's obviously things to think about in terms of how to use it, which people, I think, are needing to navigate, and there's support out there to help them do that. But certainly there is a real sense that there's potential here. And we can see that if we just go to the next couple of slides. So when we compare these different technologies, this survey compared to the last survey, we can see where the sort of growth areas appear to be. So whilst cloud computing and BIM are kind of, to some extent, reaching some level of sort of maturity in terms of they've been growing for a little while and are used by perhaps the majority, what we can see with things like offsite and digital twins and AI is that whilst they're not happening on as many projects or being used by as many people, they are growing more. So they're the areas where perhaps in the future we might see more adoption of technologies and more interesting things happening. So that's in terms of what kind of has happened between now and 2021. Going forward, in terms of what people think will be significant, so we asked people about these different technologies and what they think will be most significant in the next 5 years, particularly in terms of helping to improve the industry. So BIM does still sit at the top in terms of the area that people think is most significant. And I think some of that does relate to a lot of people's feeling that better information management and sort of structured data, machine readable data, those kind of things help to enable the other technologies. And we see cloud computing coming next, which is again partly probably unsurprising given how many people are using it. But what's quite interesting is that AI is the fourth one on this list, even though it's the least used of the different technology areas. So a lot of people do see the potential for that in the next few years. And there are differences between different types of respondent too. So there are some people, some of the younger respondents in particular, who actually ranked AI higher than that, kind of at number 3 in this sort of ranking list. And whilst everybody, all the different groups, pretty much see BIM as the most significant thing, there are some who see BIM as more important than others. So, for instance, sort of architects and consultants compared to some of the other people working on the project team. So there are some differences there. But yeah, I think AI, as a lot of people anticipate, is probably going to be one to watch over the next couple of years. So the last section is just about how the technology can help to enable hopefully better ways of working. Kind of, if it doesn't, then there's obviously a question about why people are using it and developing it. So really, that's what it needs to do. So we ask a few questions around that. The first one is just to kind of keep tracking what's happening in terms of people's preferred places to work. Obviously, since the pandemic, we saw an immediate shift to many people being heavily based at home, or at least splitting their time between home and where they would normally tend to have worked before that, whether that's in an office, on site, in a factory. So we asked about that again to see whether there's signs of this being a long-term trend. I think a lot of information out there does suggest that it is, and this kind of appears to back that up. So 55% of people expect to split their time between home and the workplace. That's slightly lower than when we asked it in 2021, but really not very much at all, a small difference. And we see that about a quarter do expect to mainly be in the workplace. And for some professions, obviously that's essential. People based on site or in factories manufacturing products. And then we do see some people who expect to mainly be at home as well. So it does appear that kind of that long-term trend is there of people sort of working flexibly in different locations. In terms of some of the key industry challenges that we talk about all the time in the industry, making better buildings, having a positive impact on sustainability, and creating a safer built environment, then what we see here is kind of a fairly consistent finding that over the years that the majority of people do see digital tech as helping to achieve these things. The figures have hovered around these levels since we've been asking them over the last few years. So on one hand, I think that's a positive thing, and the majority of people in the industry can see that digital technologies can help to achieve the things that we want to achieve as an industry. Perhaps the downside of that is that it's not higher, it's not really grown. So there are people in the industry who don't necessarily agree with that. So there are questions about whether the technologies are appropriate, or whether it's more to do with issues that we've already highlighted, that perhaps some people feel that it's harder for them to actually do what they need to, change the way they work, invest in things to actually benefit from them. So there's still a challenge there of helping to make sure that they can actually benefit all parts of the industry. Just focusing on one of those things in particular, in terms of environmental sustainability, we asked for the first time whether people were using digital technologies to calculate a range of different environmental sustainability metrics. And what we find here is, as a percentage of all people who took part in the survey, 40% said that they were using it to calculate embodied carbon, and nearly the same to calculate energy demand. Excuse me. And then we had a range of other things that were mentioned, but a majority of people overall, about 2/3, mentioned using digital technologies to calculate at least one of these things, whether it was water use demand or energy demand. So, that does suggest that these technologies are being used in a positive way for a practical use to help better understand the environmental impact of projects. So, you know, that seems to be one really kind of good positive example there of how digital tech is helping us to build buildings and other types of construction asset in some way that does help the environment. And then finally, the kind of last area that we looked at was kind of this broader area of how people perceive the industry. So over the years, you know, with a number of high-profile reports that have been produced about the industry, there's been quite a lot of kind of criticism and kind of assessment of the industry as being behind many other industries in terms of its sort of use of digital technologies and its kind of perhaps resistance to change and those kinds of things. So we thought it would be useful to ask, you know, given a lot of innovation that's happened over the last few years, whether people felt that the industry still kind of lagged behind others in terms of digital transformation and that kind of thing. And also, again, just sort of checking that in with people to make sure that they do see digital transformation as relevant for them and working in the industry. So we can see here that the blue colouring on the right-hand side of these graphics is people disagreeing with the statement, and it's got purpley pink ones are people agreeing. You know, by the number of the amount of blue in the top ones, you can see that, you know, the majority of people disagree that digital transformation is not relevant to them and is only for large organizations. So, you know, most people see it as something which is relevant, see it as something which, you know, can help a better way of working. If we then look at the statement about whether the industry no longer lags behind other industries, opinions are a bit more split. So, you know, quite a lot of people still disagree with that statement, that the industry no longer lags behind. So essentially, a lot of people still feel that the industry does lag behind. So perhaps there's work to do, although, you know, there are quite a few people who agree that it doesn't anymore. So, you know, I think that some people are seeing that progress has been made with new technologies and new innovations which are having an effect, but there's perhaps still a bit of a way to go. And then the last one, in terms of people being worried about whether they're left behind, views are really split on that, almost kind of equally between those who are worried they're going to be left behind and those who aren't. So a real kind of spread there, perhaps reflective of where people are at perhaps in their kind of journey. So just coming towards the end, and a few more statements from people who took part in the survey about some of the things which are kind of important to them or things that they see as issues. So some talking about, you know, how, again, the kind of issue that some of the technologies appear more accessible to larger firms. You know, if you can have a dedicated member of a team who can spend time looking at new technologies and bringing those in, then obviously that's something which could be perhaps more easily done than a smaller organization where you've got one or two people kind of doing a bit of everything. There's also, again, the theme we mentioned before about kind of workloads in terms of, you know, what BIM encourages, perhaps, in that the design at the beginning of the project is particularly important, and kind of more work might need to happen at that stage of the project than a bit later on. So it's kind of just perhaps understanding that and how that affects that design phase. And then also the point about the kind of nature of the industry being kind of hands-on, and obviously people need to construct buildings on site. And so it's making sure that whilst off-site construction is developing and more is going to happen in factories, there's still that sort of need for people, you know, on the ground to have the information that they need, and for the technology to kind of help support them in that task as well as the design side. So just a final few thoughts before we finish. There is still a bit of a debate about the meaning and value of BIM, but it's also seen as being the area of kind of digital ways of working that has the most potential for positive impact. So I think that on balance, people see it as a positive thing and still, you know, want to engage with it. And the challenge really is helping people do that. So outside that kind of the large project new build side of things, so applying it to landscape infrastructure, refurb, conservation, smaller projects. I think most people wouldn't argue that better information management is not a good thing, and so and that's even more important now with the requirements of the Building Safety Act. So kind of following some of the key principles of BIM does seem really important, especially things like making sure everybody knows what they need to do on a project and communicating that information really clearly through things like detailed responsibility matrices. People generally do see digital ways of working as having a positive effect. There are some people who might question it, but the majority do see that, and that's reflected in some of the growth areas we've seen in the survey. So offsite construction, digital twins, AI, those areas, and I think they're ones that are going to be one to watch over the next few years. And one nice positive aspect of that is the use of digital technologies to calculate environmental metrics and help to address that massive challenge of reducing carbon on projects. And then finally, the final kind of point to mention is just I think the challenge is to help make sure that digital technology can be something which benefits all in the industry and applied to all parts of the industry. So as well as on-site, as well as the design phase, and also there, just making sure that whilst we adopt new technologies, that we're also doing is retaining the skills and knowledge in the industry about buildings and the built environment as well. So people need to have the technology knowledge, but also the knowledge about how to build good buildings as well. And there are some comments about that in the survey that just explain the importance of that we shouldn't lose that as experienced people retire. That needs to carry on in the education process to make sure that people who understand buildings are working in the industry as well as people who understand digital tech. So hopefully that was of interest to people, and thanks very much for listening. You can download the full report on our website. So there's the web address there for you, and there's more detail in the report too. It's great to know what people think of the report. So there is an opportunity to fill in a really short little feedback survey at the end of the report. So please tell us what you think. And thanks again for listening, and I'll hand over back to Stephen now.
Yeah, so thank you very much, David. Great presentation. So just to sort of close out, the emails that will come out following this, so thanking everyone for attending, will have some links. So the first link will be to some exclusive presentations from our recent annual conference. So we'll have presentations, some that are already available, but from Dame Judith Hackett. We've got one from Bowder talking about how manufacturers work with specifiers. My own presentation talking about what NBS have been up to, what we're doing next year, and also from Jonathan MacDonald on digital innovation. So we'll send some links through on some sort of short, sort of 20-25 minutes presentations from our conference. A reminder also that the digital construction report is now available to download. So if you come to our website, thembs.com, hover over resources, and you just see there the digital construction report along the one from earlier this year, the Sustainable Future one. You can just download by coming in there and sort of clicking the button. But yeah, thank you everybody for your time today. Please pop any messages in the chat. If you'd like to know more about NBS Digital Solutions, visit thembs.com to find out more about NBS Chorus for specification writing and NBS Source for well-structured construction product manufacturer information. Any questions at all, just drop us an email and get in touch there on info@thembs.com. Thank you very much, and goodbye.